In this video, I'm going to go through something called break-even analysis. Before I go through what break-even is, I need to explain the difference between fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs are those costs that don't increase or decrease as you produce more or less. In other words, I'm not saying they never increase. They can increase by something like inflation, but they don't increase if you produce one item or 100 items. And your two fixed costs here are your factory overhead costs and your admin costs. So for example, if you pay rent for the factory, you pay the same amount of rent whether you use the factory to make one product or 100 products. You have your lights on in the factory, so you pay the same electricity whether you're making one product or 100 products. There are some of your factory overhead costs that could be semi-fixed costs because they do increase as you use more, like something like electricity. But at school level, we regard all factory overhead costs and all admin costs as fixed. So they remain constant as the production level increases or decreases. Variable costs, those are the ones that increase as you produce more or decrease as you produce less. So if you think about this, if you're making one item, you're going to use far fewer materials than if you're making 100 items. Likewise, you probably only need one worker to manufacture one item, but more workers if you're going to manufacture 100 items. And if you're making more items, you're going to need more salesmen to sell those items, do more advertising, etc. So that's also a variable cost. So your materials, your labor, and your selling and distribution, as you produce more, they will increase. As you produce less, if you cut back on production, those will decrease. Now, break-even point means the number of units you need to make that you don't make a profit or loss. Now, for you to not make a profit or loss, you basically need to cover these fixed costs. You need to understand that these fixed costs you pay even if your factory stands empty. You still got to pay the rent, even if you're not making anything. You still have to insure the building, even if you're not making anything. So we need to make enough profit to cover those fixed costs. So let's just look at an example here. If I tell you your fixed costs are 100,000, and I tell you that if you take selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit, you make a profit of 2 Rand. I want to know now how many units I need to make in order to cover those fixed costs. So X times 2 Rand must be 100,000. And if you then work this out, it means you've got to make 50,000 units. If you make 50,000 units, and each one of them makes a profit of 2 Rand, that is going to give you the 100,000, which is what your fixed costs are. Okay, let's look at a worked example. The first one asks you to calculate the break-even point, and they give you information. Okay, the formula for break-even point, just going back to this example, we actually took our fixed costs here and we divided by our profit, and our profit was selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So we take our total fixed costs here of 3,102,500 divided by the 29 Rand is your selling price minus your variable cost of 19.50. Those two subtracted will give you your profit. And then you multiply that and divide that out, and you end up with this number of units. Please remember, you always round off to a whole number here. Even if you've got a decimal 78,1, for example, you still round off until the next whole number. So you don't round up or down, you always round up. Right, then explain why the owner should be concerned about the break-even point quote figures. If you look here, your break-even point last year was 273,000. That's how many units we needed to produce to break even. This year, we need to produce 326,579 units just to break even. So that's going to mean that we need to make an extra 53,579 units just to break even, which means your costs must have increased. Explain why the owner should not be satisfied with the direct material cost per unit. If you look at the direct material cost per unit, it's gone from R5.60 to R7.56, almost R2 increase. And if you work out the percentage increase, in other words, you take the increase over R5, it gives you a 35% increase, and that's much higher than the inflation rate. Apart from changing supplier to get a cheaper price, provide an alternative solution to the problem. Okay, less wastage of raw materials, so you don't have to keep buying additional raw materials. Train your workers to use the materials more effectively, and so on. Okay, in the final production video, I would do a worked example on break even. Thank you.